Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Stench of Truth Radio here on blogtalkradio.com/the Stench of Truth. I'm sure a lot of you know me from YouTube videos, which are a completely different experience than what we do here at Blog Talk Radio. Whereas in YouTube, I mostly talk about politics and economics, some of the critical issues of our time. In that sense, here on Blog Talk Radio, I talk about the paranormal and alternative history and science. And if you are joining me to listen today, you'll know that my guest is Michael Cremo, who is well known as the Forbidden Archaeologist. And in fact, we will be discussing Mr. Cremo's book, The Forbidden Archaeologist, which is a collection of columns that Mr. Cremo wrote for Atlantis Rising magazine. One of the other books that he is justly and widely known for is The Hidden History of the Human Race, or Forbidden Archaeology, which he co-wrote with Richard Thompson. That is a massive book, and it is filled with all kinds of anomalous data which put human origins on Earth further back into the past than archaeologists and anthropologists readily concede. Mr. Cremo has several websites. You can find him at mcremo.com. That's mcremo.com. You can also find him at forbiddenarchaeologist.com. That's forbiddenarchaeologist.com, forbiddenarchaeologist.com, and forbiddenarchaeology.com. And Michael Cremo has been around the world to many different nations, giving talks and lectures. So I'm very pleased to have him on my show today. And before I bring him on the line, I want to read this little blurb from forbiddenarchaeologist.com, which answers the question, why is Michael Cremo the Forbidden Archaeologist? This is from Badger, California, August 2010. Michael Cremo, an international authority on human antiquity, has justly earned the Forbidden Archaeologist title. For over 27 years, he's been digging up documented, credible findings that mainstream archaeologists don't want you to know about. Discoveries in the fossil record that tell a completely different story from Darwinian evolution. His latest book, The Forbidden Archaeologist, Torchlight Publishing, copyright 2010, invites the reader to follow along as he presents his research at international scientific conferences, comments on the latest discoveries and missing links, examines famous archaeological sites such as the Sterkfontein Caves, the alleged cradle of humanity, and responds to mixed reactions to his books, now translated into 26 languages. The Forbidden Archaeologist contains material not found in Cremo's previous books. Each article is a bite-sized, easily readable introduction to aspects of the author's forbidden archaeology work and his latest thinking on human origins and antiquity. A few of the topics the Forbidden Archaeologist presents in his new book: archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity, the knowledge filter that screens out evidence that contradicts currently dominant theories of human origins, his meetings with leading figures in alternative science, insights into a new conscious-based explanation of human origins, his responses to recent discoveries in human origins research, his presentations at international scientific conferences, Christian and Vedic creationism viewpoints examined, discoveries about Indian archaeology and the Aryan invasion theory. This collection of 49 articles published in Atlantis Rising magazine is like the cliff notes of his best-selling encyclopedic Forbidden Archaeology and formidable Human Devolution. Readers will quickly understand the strongest arguments and remarkable discoveries that reveal evolution as a failing theory. So strap yourself in, folks. I'm going to bring Michael Cremo up online, and we're going to have a really great show. Michael, are you there?
Yes, I am, Ted. It's good to be with you and all your listeners.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you. I'm so glad you agreed to do the show. I followed your work for many years, and, when Forbidden Archaeology came out, I have the original full-size, massive tome. I know it came out in abridged form at some point later, but I've had this book for a number of years, and I'll tell you, it's just a wealth of information. And your new book, Forbidden Archaeologist, which is, as I said, a collection of Atlantis Rising columns, I can highly recommend as well. I'm about 2/3 of the way through that book. And I would just like to say for everybody out there, if you are thinking about getting a book, you should get both of these. But in regards to the Forbidden Archaeologist, one thing, too, about this book, everything is expressed, like I read there in that little intro, in bite-sized pieces. It's easily digestible, very well written, and the book is extremely well made. It's very nice paper, hardback book. It even comes with a little page marker already attached, which is really nice. And I'm a lover of books, so whenever I get a nice looking book, I think that's a good thing too. So welcome to the show, Michael.
Great to be here.
Okay, so one thing I wanted to ask you first off the bat is what got you interested in archaeology, anthropology, and the sorts of topics that you dig into being the Forbidden Archaeologist?
Well, that has something to do with the way I was raised. I was born in a military family. My father was an intelligence officer in the United States Air Force, and that meant a couple of things. First of all, it meant that our family was moving from place to place every 3 or 4 years within the United States and also abroad to different countries. And that had a big influence on me as a child. What it did is it opened my mind to the reality that there's more than one way to look at the world. There are different cultures, there are different peoples around the world with different ways of looking at things. And as I grew older, I began to understand that I would have to construct my own worldview, taking elements of whatever worldviews I'd been exposed to during that time of travel and exposure to new ideas and new ways of looking at things. So among all the different worldviews that I had encountered, the ancient spiritual tradition of India seemed to resonate with me in a lot of ways. So it became my major source of ideas. I began studying the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, and especially the historical writings. In them, I found accounts of human origins and human antiquity that were quite different from what I learned from my teachers in high school and university. When I was a student in high school and later in university, I accepted the current dominant scientific theory of human origins, the Darwinian evolutionary theory, which tells us that human beings like ourselves first appeared on Earth between 100,000 and 200,000 years ago. We're told that before that there were no human beings like us. There were simply more primitive ape-like human ancestors, and before that, simple mammals. But in these ancient Sanskrit writings of India, I encountered the idea that humans like us have been present on Earth for millions and millions of years, going all the way back to the very beginnings of the history of life on Earth. So it was something quite different than I'd learned from my teachers in high school and university. So I had to wonder, well, what is the status of the accounts that I read in these ancient books of knowledge? And of course, this idea that humans have always been present on Earth is something that's found not just in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. It's part of most of the great wisdom traditions of the world that have always existed. So I had to wonder, well, what is the status of these accounts? Are they mythology? Are they fiction? Or are they possibly candidates for truth, for the actual historical facts? So I thought I should do some research to see if there was any archaeological evidence that would support this idea of extreme human antiquity. The first place I looked was in the current textbooks of archaeology and anthropology. And in those textbooks, I did not find any evidence for extreme human antiquity. I found only the discoveries that support the currently dominant scientific theory of human evolution. But I decided, okay, let me look beyond the textbooks. And again, this has to do, at least in part, with my family background. As I mentioned, my father was an Air Force intelligence officer, and that experience led me to understand there are facts about the world that many people are not aware of. There is such a thing as hidden knowledge. There are things that are going on behind the scenes that many people aren't aware of. Of course, this was in the days before WikiLeaks and things like that. So I thought, okay, the textbooks are saying one thing, but let me dig a little bit deeper into this. Let me go back to the primary scientific literature. And by that, I mean original reports by archaeologists, geologists, and other earth scientists published in the professional scientific literature. So when I did that, when I started looking into the original reports from the past 2 centuries, I discovered many reports by scientists about discoveries of human bones, human artifacts, and human footprints, many, many millions of years old. So I collected all of those reports in the book Forbidden Archaeology, which you've mentioned. Some people call it Forbidding Archaeology because it's 900 pages long, and it's a bit daunting for many people. But there are many people who appreciate the wealth of documentation that's present in that book, which you can find nowhere else. So then I had to consider, well, why is it that there are all of these reports of archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity in the original scientific literature, but they're not in the textbooks? What's going on here? And that led me to understand there's a process of knowledge filtration that operates in the scientific world, discoveries that confirm the dominant theory today pass through that filter very easily, and reports of evidence that radically contradict that dominant theory tend to get filtered out simply because they contradict that theory. So that's how I got into this whole topic of forbidden archaeology.
Well, certainly, I think that everybody listening can agree that what you said is absolutely true regarding there being hidden knowledge in the world that we are not regularly exposed to, and oftentimes it takes a considerable amount of work to uncover that, because for whatever reason, the people who are involved in the discovery of these things tend to want to shove them aside into a dark room somewhere where people aren't going to find it. And in reading your books, there are so many examples of this happening. And when you look at it from an objective point of view, you can clearly see the knowledge filter in action and how it works to eliminate contradictory evidence, or at least to downplay its significance. And as I said, I'm about 2/3 of the way through your book. I've been reading it this week. The new one, that is, Forbidden Archaeologist. And it is a collection of your writings from Atlantis Rising magazine. Can you tell us how you got involved with them and started writing a column for them?
Well, about 10 years ago, the editor of Atlantis Rising, Doug Kenyon, approached me asking about whether or not I would like to contribute a column, a regular column, to Atlantis Rising magazine. And it's a magazine that deals with a wide spectrum of alternative science topics, ranging from paranormal research to UFO research to alternative history research, alternative physics research. So I thought it would be, the readership of that magazine would be a good audience for a column that I could write. And also for me, I was attracted by the idea of writing a short column, because most of the projects I work on are massive research projects that result in fairly big books being published, and they take years to get done. For example, the research and writing of the book Forbidden Archaeology took me about 8 years. The writing and research of a follow-up book called Human Devolution took 5 years. So I was attracted to the idea of being able to write 1,500 words, in a column, and that would take me, a few hours to put together. That was something that I felt I needed as a writer. To be able to get something done quickly and get it out to readers, and I also felt it would give me an opportunity to respond more quickly to different discoveries and research that I was working on. So for those reasons, I decided to accept Doug Kenyon's offer to do the column for the magazine Atlantis Rising. And also in the back of my mind was the idea that, well, I could collect those columns and put them out as books, because I had noticed that this was something that many scientists and researchers do. They write columns for different publications, and after some years they're able to collect them and put them out as books in order to reach a wider audience than the readership of the magazine that they're writing for. So for all of those reasons, I decided to do the column. I've been doing it now for over 10 years, and I like doing it. I chose the name The Forbidden Archaeologist for the column, and hence, that was the title of my latest book, which is a collection of those columns from Atlantis Rising magazine.
Well, you certainly would qualify as a forbidden archaeologist, if anybody would, for delving into areas that the current scientific paradigm doesn't want to uncover or consider. One thing that I like about the book is that it's sort of like part travelogue and also part diary of your various travels around the world to historical sites and conferences and lectures, and you talk about people that you meet and and some things that you've been involved with that are related to archaeology and anthropology, of course, but also with some of the other, shall we say, fringe subjects, which you touched a little bit on, talking about some of the other areas that Atlantis Rising magazine talks about. And I use fringe in the sense that it's viewed as fringe by so-called mainstream science. But I think all of those areas are valuable areas of research, and I have enjoyed reading your column and Atlantis Rising magazine. I think it's a very good magazine, and I recommend it to anybody who wants to have a magazine that collects information on areas that are not generally researched by the so-called mainstream scientific community, and looking at other modes of thought and ideas. So that's one thing that I really liked about it is it's a very personal kind of interaction with people that you're evoking with the columns in the magazine. And was that something that you were striving for?
Yes, actually, I in my books like Forbidden Archaeology and the others, I'm kind of in the background. I'm foregrounding the factual information, but in these columns in Atlantis Rising magazine, I wanted to give the readers a little bit of a sense of what it's like personally to be involved in this type of research and in presenting this kind of information to different audiences, including mainstream scientific audiences and alternative scientific audiences. I wanted to give them a little bit of insight into that part of the work, which they wouldn't necessarily find if they went through my other books.
I see, yes, and it definitely comes through. The like I said, it's part travelogue and part diary, and I like the way it's written because, as I mentioned, it's very easy for you to absorb the important aspects of what you're talking about, but also gives you a feel for, actually being out in the field and meeting people and doing things. It's a different style of writing from straightforward, like academic approach that a lot of people would use, and I think that it is a way for you to connect with a lot more people than you normally would with like a straightforward academic writing. So I definitely applaud you for that. I think it's very well done, and it's very easy to read and enjoyable. One thing that I have to give you immense credit for, and perhaps you would like to talk about this a little bit, is the fact that you're very clear about where your point of view comes from. And that is that you have studied the ancient Vedic traditions and the Sanskrit writings of India, and you are very open about your, let's say, spiritual beliefs. And one thing that you find sorely lacking amongst the scientific community is any sort of recognition by the individuals involved in scientific research as to their own particular points of view on matters of spirit or things of this nature, which would, in some sense, have an impact on their research. And I wonder if you could comment on that particular aspect of how things are, because in my view, I think that, like if a scientist is like an atheist or calls himself an atheist or an agnostic or a Christian or whatever, particular spiritual point of view he chooses to take, I can't help but believe that the spiritual approach that he has in his personal life is going to be expressed in the work that he does in science. What's your take on that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right about that, Ted, and therefore, I wanted to make explicit what my personal commitments are in order to, first of all, I do that because as I said, I want to be open and explicit about that so my readers can take that into account as they're going through my work. Also, when I look at the whole history of science, I see that the current idea that science and spirituality are two separate things is a false idea. First of all, it doesn't reflect the actual realities of the history of science, and many prominent historians of science have understood this when they look at the work, for example, of Sir Isaac Newton, the father of modern physics. They see that actually, in addition to writing about his physics and optics and things like that, he also wrote a lot about alchemy. He wrote a book a lot about, he was a Christian. He wrote a lot about the Book of Revelations and for him, all of this, the spirituality, the physics, everything was part of a whole unified project as far as he was concerned. But in modern days, we've tended to filter out that side of his work and just concentrate on the physics and the mathematics and the optics and things like that. We've removed that element from its whole context, wider context in which it was connected with his spiritual and philosophical ideas. So I think this is unfortunate. I think science should deal with everything that's possibly true about the world. And one thing that's possibly true about the world that we live in is that there are non-material aspects to it that may be very important. For example, there may be some higher intelligence that has something to do with the order and complexity that we observe in the world around us. There may be a non-material component to the human organism. This is something that may be true about the world that we live in. Now, today, many scientists look at science as a game. It's a game that's played by certain rules, and according to them, one of the rules is you cannot introduce any non-material substance. You cannot introduce any idea of higher control or intelligence involved in the production of the material phenomenon that we observe around us. But I think those are artificial rules. I think they restrict science. They make science incomplete. So, as I said, I believe that science should involve everything that's possibly true about the world that we live in, that we experience. And I think these ideas of non-material realities, of higher intelligence being involved somehow in the production of the forms that we see around us are things that need to be considered. So I try to make all of this explicit in my approach, to these questions. So I'm open about my spiritual commitments. I could go into detail what they are. I don't really want to try to promote them or try to convert people, but if they do go through my works, they will see that I'm very open about what my spiritual commitments are, what my spiritual practices are. For example, for spiritual reasons, I practice some meditation every day, and going through those columns in The Forbidden Archaeologist, you might read about how, when I'm at a scientific conference, I get up early in the morning and I do some meditation. So I'm very open about these things where I get my inspiration from, things of that sort.
Well, I think, as I said, that's something that I commend you for, because as I did note, the most mainstream scientists tend to divorce the idea of spirituality or even non-material things, as you stated, from their scientific work. And knowing where someone comes from and knowing the beliefs that someone has, I think, is important to allowing people to, have another facet of the scientist's background in order to, place the things that they write about and the investigations that they do into the proper context. And that is to say that one particular piece of evidence or whatever that doesn't conform to a strongly held religious belief might not be accepted by someone who was in a science position, who was investigating a particular archaeological site or something along these lines. And you might call into question some of the work that they do. So I think it would be wise for everybody in the scientific world to adopt the stance that you have, to be open about where their beliefs are, and that way, if there's any question about what their particular spiritual motivations are, people will be able to examine them and come to their own conclusions about them. So I think it's a very good thing that you're doing, and I think it's something that should be more widely practiced within science. Yeah,
I of course agree, and as I said, I'm open about where my spiritual commitments are. I'm inspired by the spiritual wisdom of ancient India, and within that, there's a whole spectrum of spiritual beliefs. I come from an approach that's called bhakti, or the yoga of devotion. I meditate on the Hare Krishna mantra. I'm very open about these things.
Yes.
But I don't claim. One thing is, I don't claim to have a monopoly on truth. I think this is one problem in the world today, is exclusive claims to truth, and that's something I try to avoid. I see truth in a lot of different places, in a lot of different wisdom traditions and religions and spiritualities, and I see truth in science. I see truth in a lot of different places. I look at myself as a human being approaching truth, trying to find truth, and I'll accept truth wherever I find it, just like a person might be looking for gold, and you can find gold in a lot of different places. You could find gold coins stamped with the symbols of different nations, but I mean, if it's really gold, then what difference does it make what label you put on it? The main thing is that it's gold. So I try to use an analogy or a metaphor. I try to see gold wherever I find it. So, and I think in the world of science, there are some considerations. For example, the concept of God, for example, plays different roles in religion, in philosophy, and I believe in science. In religion, God is an object of worship, and in modern democratic societies, governments don't interfere with people's religious freedom. They're allowed to worship God as they see fit in modern democratic free societies, and that I think that's good. Or they're free to be atheists if they like. That's a feature of modern democratic societies. There's freedom of conscience. And also in philosophy, God is not an object of worship. God is there, a conclusion that many philosophers down through history have come to by their exercise of logic and reason. They've concluded there must be something that we can call God, as a result of their philosophical work. And we don't see that governments are saying, there's this idea somehow or other that God has to be completely separate from any sort of academic or intellectual endeavor. But we don't see that governments are telling university professors, for example, that you can't teach in a public university like the University of California or the University of Moscow or whatever. That they aren't saying now that you can't teach any philosopher who's ever come to the conclusion that there's a God. For example, you can't teach Aristotle, you can't teach St. Augustine, you can't teach St. Thomas. We don't find that happening. That it's a public university, it's government controlled, it's using tax money from the people, and we don't see that the government is saying to university professors and state universities that they can't teach any philosopher who's ever come to the conclusion that there's a God. And I think that's good. That's the way it should be. But in science, God is not an object of worship. God is not just some philosophical conclusion, but God is a conclusion that some scientists have reached through their study of nature. In other words, through their study of nature, scientists down through history have inferred the existence of some higher intelligence that has something to do with the order and complexity that we observe in the world around us. Sir Isaac Newton certainly had that idea. Many other scientists have had that idea. From their study of nature, they've inferred there must be some kind of higher intelligence involved in producing the order and complexity that we see around us. But today, many scientists are trying to forbid that inference. They're trying to say, no, you cannot make that inference. Somehow they see that as violating some principle of separation of God and science or God and state or something, which I think is totally artificial. Down through history, many scientists have made that inference, and I think it should be up to each individual scientist whether or not to make that inference that there is some higher intelligence involved in the production of the order and complexity that we observe in the world around us. Now, some are going to make that inference, some are not going to make that inference. I think those are decisions for each individual scientist to make, and historically, we can see down through history and even to the present day, different scientists and researchers have made that inference or not made that inference. That's a fact. And I think that diversity of opinion should be reflected in the education system, in the public tax-supported education system. Unfortunately, the majority of scientists today who are of the type that refuse to make that inference or say it should not be part of the science curriculum, they're now in the majority, and they've managed to convince governments to give them a monopoly in the education system. So they've managed to exclude any alternative ideas, and they've managed to impose their ideas on everyone through a government-enforced monopoly that they now have in the education systems. For example, no alternatives to a purely materialistic Darwinian evolutionary account of the origin of species is allowed in the education systems in any country that I know of. Although there are scientists all over the world who are proposing alternatives to the materialistic Darwinian evolutionary explanation of the origin of species. They're proposing alternatives that involve non-material substance. They're proposing alternatives that involve higher intelligence involved in the production of the order and complexity that we observe on the biological level, and that's a fact. But unfortunately, the way things are today, the views, these alternative views, are completely excluded from the official curriculum in the public tax-supported school systems. And I think that's not really the way things should go in democratic free societies. No one group, even a majority group, should be able to hijack the whole education system and use it to impose only their ideas on everyone, using the tax money of all the people to do it. I think that's wrong.
Well, I can but agree with you, and I think that if anybody were to look at it from a sort of purely philosophical point of view and from an objective point of view, when anybody starts a particular argument or theory and automatically rejects a particular class of evidence or ideas as a possible conclusion, even though it is possible, and in some cases may even be probable, that kind of invalidates the entire idea of science, and that is for the discovery of truth. And this sort of brings us to something that you talk about quite a bit in your book, and that is the knowledge filter that is in place in archaeology. And I think that's just another example of the knowledge filter. And one of the things that I just read, one of the columns from the Forbidden Archaeologist book, was talking about the Hueyatlico site in Mexico, and how the anthropologists and archaeologists who were investigating the site had called in a group of geologists to date it for them, and they came up with a date of 250,000 years for human-like tools being found in the Americas, which totally blows away the scheme of things when it comes to not only human origins but humankind in the New World altogether. And the thing that really struck me is that you put in the column that you wrote about it. You said that the anthropologists and archaeologists refused to accept the date and published their findings without the dating added, because they refused to accept the idea that what they were seeing was as old as the geologist was telling them it was.
Yeah, this is a case with which I'm very familiar. One of the geologists involved was Virginia Steen McIntyre, who I know personally. And, you know, up to the point she became involved in this case, you know, she was a rising star in her profession. You know, she had invented a new method of dating called tetrahydration. She had been getting invitations to speak at international conferences. She was getting grant money. So somehow or other, she was invited to go down to Hueyatlico, Mexico, as part of a team of geologists to date this site. You know, the archaeologists there had uncovered some human artifacts. They wanted to know how old they were, so they brought, you know, the geologists down there. So Virginia Steen McIntyre and her colleagues used four different scientific methods to date the site, and all the four methods converged on an age of over 250,000 years for the site. So they presented that to the archaeologists, and the archaeologists just said, well, that's impossible. You know, first of all, no human beings capable of making those artifacts existed anywhere in the world 250,000 years ago. They hadn't evolved yet, according to their understanding, their theory. And what to speak of being present in North America, their current idea is that there were no humans in North America any earlier than 20,000 years ago maximum. So they just refused to accept the date given by their own hand-picked team of geologists. They just refused to publish it. They published a far younger age for the site, and that upset Virginia Steen McIntyre and her colleagues. They just didn't relate to that at all. So what they did is they independently published the age for the site in a scientific journal. But when they did that, they experienced an extreme negative backlash from their colleagues in the scientific world. And Virginia Steen McIntyre said, she began to be called a maverick, a troublemaker, a publicity seeker, and her career as a geologist was effectively finished at that point because she had dared publish something that contradicted the dominant evolutionary theory of human origins. And she later wrote a letter to the one of the editors of the scientific journal that published her report, saying, not really being an archaeologist or anthropologist, I didn't understand how deeply woven into our thought the current theories of human evolution had become. She wrote, the archaeologists rejected our findings at Huaylaco, our dating of Huaylaco, simply because it contradicted that theory, period. I mean, that was the end of it. It contradicted the theory. It couldn't possibly be true. Therefore, we're not going to publish it. And, Virginia Steen McIntyre lost a teaching position that she held at a university in the United States. And it was just a classic example of how this knowledge filtering process works. And these are the kinds of things that greatly interest me. First of all, I like cases that demonstrate extreme human antiquity. That's part of it. But I also like documentation of how the knowledge filtering process operates in particular cases, such as this. And this Huaylaco case is just a classic example.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the particular cases that I look at as being one of the best documented cases, which is practically completely unknown, or at least unacknowledged within the scientific community, which has a tremendous amount of evidence for it, and is just routinely not, as I said, not acknowledged, and it's not entered into the official thinking when it comes to looking at human origins and the timing of well, of course, they would say evolution of man, and that was one of the cases that really made me understand. It led to an understanding with me that what we were seeing in so-called mainstream science was this knowledge filtration process at work, and you can clearly see it there. Plain as day. The archaeologists and anthropologists just said, well, we have human tools, and you're telling us that they're 250,000 years old. That can't be true, so therefore, even though your dating is that we can't fault it in any way, because after all, they're geologists, their geological dating methods are accurate. They're the experts on that subject. They just chose to ignore it altogether and give the site at a younger age because it did not correspond to their beliefs, and that is probably the very best example of the knowledge filtration process that you're talking about. Some of the other interesting, like Huaylaco was one of those ones that stuck out in my mind, but there are a couple of other very interesting cases of extreme human antiquity in the Americas especially, which I find very fascinating. And one of those was work done in the early 1900s in California, and some remains found that were millions of years old. Would you care to comment on some of those discoveries?
Well, I think what you're referring to there is the California gold mine discovery.
Yes, that's right.
Which actually occurred in the 19th century.
Oh, those were the late 1800s then.
Yeah, the late
Yes.
1800s.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, gold had been discovered in California, and miners had come from all over to get it. And to get the gold, they were digging tunnels into the sides of mountains, such as Table Mountain in the Sierra Nevada mountains and near the town of Sonora in California. And deep inside these tunnels in the solid rock, the miners were finding human bones and human artifacts. For example, they were finding obsidian spear points. They were finding stone mortars and pestles. They were finding all kinds of things just in many different locations in the gold mining region. And what's interesting to me is that these discoveries were being made in layers of rock, solid rock, that modern geologists tell us are about 50 million years old. Technically, they're from the early Eocene period. So that goes back about 50 million years. So all of these discoveries were collected by Dr. J.D. Whitney, who was the chief government geologist of California. He went out to the sites. He carefully investigated them. He documented these things extensively, and he published a huge report. It came out from Harvard University's Museum of Comparative Zoology in the year 1880. And they're really fascinating discoveries, but we don't hear very much about them today because of that process of knowledge filtration that we've been talking about. And it's not necessarily a satanic conspiracy to suppress truth. It's something that philosophers and historians of science have understood for a long time, namely that theoretical preconceptions can govern how scientists treat evidence in a particular discipline. And I've simply tried to show how that very well-known process operates in archaeology. So in the late 19th century, there was another scientist, a contemporary of Whitney's. His name was William Holmes. He was an anthropologist at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. So he was situated at the center of scientific influence in 19th century America, the Smithsonian Institution, which is still a center of scientific research and influence today. And Whitney was out there in the provinces in California, so Holmes made use of his position of authority to make this pronouncement. He wrote in one of his reports, if Dr. Whitney had understood the theory of human evolution, he would not have reached those conclusions. He would not have published that report. In other words, if the facts did not conform to the favored theory, in this case the theory of human evolution, then those facts should be disregarded. And that's what happened. However, some of the artifacts from the California gold mines are still in the collection of the Museum of Anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley. And a few years ago, I was a consultant for a television documentary called The Mysterious Origins of Man. That was shown on NBC some years ago. It was produced by a man named Bill Cote. And Bill had read my book, Forbidden Archaeology, when it first came out, and he got in touch with me and said he wanted to include some of the cases from the book in that documentary. So I mentioned to him the case of Virginia Steen McIntyre, so he interviewed Virginia Steen McIntyre and got her story of what happened at Hoyt Laco. And then I told him he should also go to the Museum of Anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley to see those artifacts from the California gold mines. So he went there, but the museum officials refused to allow him to see those artifacts. They're not displayed to the public. However, we were able to find some photographs that Dr. Whitney had taken of the artifacts in the 19th century. So we did have some images that could be used in that documentary, The Mysterious Origins of Man. I also appeared in the documentary, as did my co-author of Forbidden Archaeology, the late Richard Thompson. So it was interesting what happened when scientists who support the current theories learned that NBC was going to show, this documentary. They tried to stop NBC from doing it. They weren't successful. NBC did show the documentary, and it was hugely popular, so they decided to show it again. So the same group of scientists, again, tried to stop NBC from showing the documentary again. They began an international letter-writing campaign to the chairman of the General Electric Company, which owns NBC, trying to get him to stop NBC from showing the documentary again. This attempt also failed, so this same group of scientists then went to the United States government, the Federal Communications Commission, which is the agency of the government that regulates the TV broadcasting industry, and they tried to get the FCC to investigate NBC, censure NBC, fine NBC millions of dollars. I'm happy to say the government didn't do any of that, but I thought it was very interesting that these kinds of attempts were made. And I documented all this very thoroughly in a book I put together called Forbidden Archaeology's Impact. So it was another interesting example of how the knowledge filtration process operates. Again, sort of a classic case.
Yes. And I remember Table Mountain as being the area after you mentioned it. I remembered the name of the area in question. And another one that I noticed in your book, and also noticed that in the columns that you have in the book reproduced, you talk about attending various scientific lectures and meeting different scientists and researchers in different fields. And one of the people that you talk about was Dr. Richard Mack. And the case of him and what happened to him, or Dr. John Mack, I'm sorry, not Richard Mack, Dr. John Mack from Harvard. And you talk about meeting him at a particular place that you spoke, and then you commented on the experience that he had with his research into alien abductions and how there was a backlash from the scientific community against him. And that was another example to me of how the knowledge filtration process must work in other disciplines as well, not just archaeology and anthropology. Would you care to comment on that?
Yes, Dr. John Mack was really a courageous researcher. He was head of the psychiatry department at Harvard University Medical School, and in his work, he encountered these reports of alien abductions, and he became curious about this topic. He was interested to know, are these people who are reporting such things neurotic or psychotic? Are they giving truthful reports? What's the story? So he did an extensive psychiatric investigation, and he came to the conclusion that the people reporting these experiences were not neurotic, they were not psychotic, they were displaying symptoms of post-traumatic stress, just like a policeman who might be involved in a shooting incident, or a soldier involved in some kind of battle incident. They were displaying symptoms that people who have real experiences normally display. They weren't displaying the symptoms of hallucinatory experiences. So as a prominent psychiatrist, he came to that conclusion, and he began writing about it, that maybe there's something to all this. And his colleagues at Harvard University were outraged that a Harvard University professor could be giving credibility to such a thing, as alien abductions and UFOs and things like that. They were outraged. So they convened an academic court to try to remove him from his position. He successfully fought that. He was able to remain in his position. And I met him at a conference in Glastonbury, England, some years ago. There was actually a crop circle conference going on there. I get invited to speak at all kinds of events. Somehow or other, this forbidden archaeology topic interests lots of people in different areas of research. So, of course, his research was more directly related. But in any case, we were both speakers at this conference in Glastonbury, England. I attended his lecture, he attended mine, and after my lecture, Dr. Mack came up to me and said he'd been following my work for a long time and had been looking forward to meeting me, and I have said the same thing. I'd been a follower of his work and appreciated the struggle that he'd gone through at Harvard to keep his position there. So we agreed to stay in touch with each other. Unfortunately, shortly after this, he died in a mysterious automobile accident in England. So we weren't able to keep up our relationship. But again, I would say it's a classic example of how the knowledge filtering process works, what kinds of pressures can be brought to bear on a researcher who strays outside the accepted boundaries of a discipline. And you're right, Ted. This sort of thing happens in lots of different disciplines. Of course, I focused on archaeology and anthropology, but it happens in other disciplines. Once I was invited to speak at a university in South Africa. I was on a lecture tour there. And at this particular university, the students were on vacation. So my audience was about 200 professors from the various departments of the university. And I gave a talk about my forbidden archaeology research and the process of knowledge filtration and how it operates in archaeology. So after the lecture, I was standing there, and one of the professors walked up to me, carefully looked around, made sure nobody was listening, and said to me, Mr. Cremo, I'm very glad that you gave this talk, especially the part about the knowledge filtration, and it's going on in my field, physics, and let me tell you about it. And then he went away. And then another professor walked up to me, looked around very carefully to make sure no one was listening, said, I'm glad you talked about this knowledge filtering process and operating in my discipline, chemistry, and let me tell you about it. So I think you're right, Ted. It's something that operates in a lot of different fields of research.
Yes, and as I said, I just happened to come across that other particular point of view, and that also was indicative of your willingness to look at a lot of different fringe ideas. And again, I use that term fringe in relation to what so-called mainstream science views as legitimate research. I don't think it's fringe research, but that's the term that they use to describe it, talking about alien abductions and other aspects of the paranormal that you touch upon in some of your columns, like being involved in a remote viewing experiment at a lecture that you gave. I think that was
That was with Stephen Schwartz. That happened in Montreal.
Yes, that's right, Montreal. Yes, and you indicated that you came up with some rather accurate results.
Well, yeah, that's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
I'd gone to this conference, and Stephen Schwartz was one of the speakers. I was one of the speakers. There were other speakers in alternative science field. And it's one of the things that I enjoy about going to conferences like that. Of course, it's nice to be able to present my research, but it's also nice to be able to meet other researchers who are dealing with these issues. So Stephen Schwartz, who I met there, was involved in the remote viewing program that the United States government funded in the 1970s and 80s. Actually, the government was making use of remote viewing in its civilian and military intelligence work. Apparently, there are some things that the governments need to know that can't be detected by spy satellites and things like that. They needed to know more in detail what was going on. For example, there was one case where the spy satellites had detected the Russians during the Soviet Union days making a large factory in one of their seaports, some distance from the coast, but still in the port city. And they were wondering, well, what's going on inside there? From the spy satellites, they could see something was going on, but they made use of remote viewers who told them, well, they're building a missile submarine inside, this building. It's going to be the largest missile submarine ever constructed anywhere in the world. And the military people were a little bit doubtful. They said, well, how could it be a submarine? This factory is miles from the coast. And the remote viewers were able to tell them, well, in the future, when the submarine is completed, they'll build a canal from this factory to the coast, and they'll float it out. So 6 months later, the spy satellites detected this. A canal was built, and a huge missile submarine, was Typhoon-class Soviet submarine, was floating out from the factory down the canal out to the ocean. So Stephen Schwartz was part of Stanford Research Institute, which was helping run this remote viewing program for the United States government in the 1970s and 1980s. So he was one of the original researchers. And this remote viewing involves some kind of paranormal ability that people have. And at the conference, I attended Stephen Schwartz's talk on this topic. He was also using this remote viewing for archaeological research, which was of direct interest to me. But in his talk, he said that this is an ability we all have. Everyone has it. Some people to a greater extent, some to a lesser extent, just like any ability, musical ability. Everyone has some musical ability. You know, some people are expert cellists or pianists. Others can just barely manage to carry a tune, but everyone has some musical ability. So he said this remote viewing ability is like that. So he had a workshop as part of his presentation. There were about 100 people there at his presentation in this hotel in Montreal, and he in the workshop he did something interesting. He selected 3 people from the group, told them to get into a taxi, get into a car, go anywhere they wanted within the city, within a 15-mile driving, a 15-minute driving radius. In other words, get in the car, drive for 15 minutes, stop somewhere, and then try to mentally send the imagery from the place you're at back to the hotel, to us here. And he also gave them a video camera that filmed the place that you're at. So the 3 people went out, got in the car, drove away. During the next 15 minutes, while they were driving to whatever the destination they were going to choose, Stephen Schwartz gave us some instruction about how to prepare ourselves to receive the imagery. He said, just clear your mind, and when the time comes, just write down whatever imagery comes into your mind. Don't edit it, don't censor it, don't question it, just put it down as it comes to you. So after 15 minutes, then the exercise began. And I was kind of convinced these people had gone to a bowling alley somewhere. I just had that idea, but the image that came to my mind was candle flames in red glass holders. And so my mind was resisting it like anything. But I thought, okay, let me just do this. Let me follow the procedure. So I just recorded that image. And then we were taken through some guided types of imagery. What do you see when you look up? What do you see when you look down? What do you see when you look right, left, so on and so forth. So, okay, I just recorded it all. Whatever imagery came into my mind during those next 15 minutes, I recorded. Then we waited for some time. After another 15 minutes, the 3 people came back from wherever they were, and they took the videotape from the camera that they had, the TV camera that they had, and they put it in the machine. And the first image that came up was candle flames in red glass holders. And I was just astonished. I believe in this stuff, but still I was shocked that I had gotten that. And I got the whole thing right. They had gone to a cathedral, and the description I had given, the red glass handles, the high walls, the light coming in through a different colored light coming through windows and things like that, I'd gotten it pretty much right. And there was another researcher who was sitting beside me, who I also know, Rupert Sheldrake, who's an English biologist who's done some work on what he calls morphogenetic fields. He also pretty much got it right. And about 60% of the people who were taking part in the exercise got substantial elements correct in their descriptions of what the imagery was. So I thought, that was fascinating. Like I said, I believe in these things, but generally my belief is at a distance, not as a participant. For me to participate in this exercise and experience what I did was really quite amazing.
Yes, your recounting of it in the book was very fascinating, and to think that you just went through a short little introductory thing in how to do it, and you were able to come up with some awesome results, which was incredible, and that's another thing that's really great about your work and what you do, and then your travels and everything that you put together in this particular book. Talking about other people that you've come across in different fields that you've examined and looked into, and the idea that you're open to a lot of other alternative points of view, not just archaeology and anthropology. But right now I'd like to turn back to some of the, I would say some of your core beliefs, and that is that goes into Indian archaeology and the Aryan invasion theory. But first, I want to ask you a question that maybe you could give us a little background on. This is from a friend of mine, Andy Colvin, wanted me to ask you about, and if you have something to say about it, I hope that you would. Are you familiar with the Garuda mythology of the East, the mythology of the Garuda?
Yes, and in Indian cosmology, there are many gods and goddesses, and they have different carriers. And the Hindu god Vishnu has a carrier called Garuda, and Garuda is generally depicted as something like an eagle, a large bird-like creature who's quite big, but is also intelligent and is a carrier. That's how it's explained in the ancient Indian cosmology.
And does the Garuda, does it have any specific function or role that it plays within the mythology, or is it just like randomly, well, maybe not randomly, but associated with the god Vishnu?
There may be many things. Sometimes, I just have to say I don't know everything about everything. That's something I'm always prepared to say that I don't know. In this particular case, what I know, what's familiar to me, is that this Garuda figure, this huge eagle-like carrier bird, is associated with Vishnu, and Vishnu travels from dimension to dimension, from place to place on this carrier called Garuda. That's the extent of my knowledge. There may be deeper aspects or different aspects to it that I'm not familiar with, but that's what I know.
Well, the one thing that my friend was curious about was if in your knowledge of the Garuda, you had come across other accounts like ancient American Indian accounts of the Thunderbird and some other things of this nature, maybe even Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, and them being sort of like archetypes of the same thing or manifestations of the same kind of phenomenon as the Garuda. And that's the reason I wanted to ask you about it.
I would say yes, this is a common feature across many different cosmologies, and it's something I've noticed in my book Human evolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory. I have a chapter in which I do a cross-cultural study of cosmologies. I look at 30 different cosmologies from various parts of the world, widely separated in time and space. Australian Aboriginal cosmology, Egyptian cosmology, African tribal cosmology, Native American cosmologies. And I see that they have a lot of common features. They all have, for example, the idea that we live in a multi-level cosmos with the different levels of the cosmos inhabited by different types of beings, and generally the beings at the lower levels are they have a denser kind of energy configuration, and those at the higher levels more subtle energy configurations. They all have the idea that a human being has a non-material aspect, a conscious self that can journey out of the body. There are a lot of common features to these cosmologies. I didn't specifically get into the Garuda bird aspect of it, where you have bird carriers or bird vehicles that are involved in various aspects of these cosmologies. But I did deal with the fact, why are these cosmologies so similar? Now, some scientists are going to say it's, the human mind comes up with similar fantasies. I don't see it, that way. The reason why these cosmologies are so similar, I believe, is that these people in these different times and places were contemplating the same realities from their different cultural perspectives. Just like one might see a mountain from the north, from the south, from the east, or from the west. So an observer on the north may describe the mountain in a certain way. That'll be slightly different from the way that an observer from the south, looking at the same mountain, might describe it. But it will also be obvious, though there are differences, they're looking at the same thing from different perspectives. So using that basic concept, we could apply it to this Garuda concept and say, somehow or other, that's a feature of one of these levels of reality. That's part of the cosmic reality that humans are approaching from their different cultural perspectives at different times and different places. This Garuda figure may be perceived in different ways by different people in different times and places, and it may become part of their traditions. And in those traditions, the exact manifestations may be slightly different, but still there's an underlying similarity. In the same way, I found in many of these different traditions, there are accounts of healing goddesses that appear to humans. And according to the cultural traditions, they may interpret or label them in different ways. For example, in Catholic Europe, they might call it Virgin Mary. In some other tradition, they might call such beings by different names. But they have common features of being healing goddesses. So I think something like that may also be operating in terms of the Garuda imagery and concept.
Well, certainly we do see throughout recorded history, we do see examples of large birds and cave paintings and depictions of ancient peoples and things like that. I just thought it was an interesting side note and wanted to get your insight into that, considering that you have done a lot of research and reading into the Eastern ideas. So I thank you for contributing that. I wanted to talk a little bit about Indian archaeology and about the Aryan invasion theory. And but before you give us a little bit of information about that, I wanted to ask you in relation to your idea about human devolution, and that is that we descended through higher planes of spirit, if you will, down into the material world, a more denser the physical matter that we occupy in our bodies. Would it be true to say that in the concept of devolution, that our ancient ancestors were necessarily more spiritually inclined because they were closer to the source of the spirituality from which they descended?
In some cases, I think the answer is yes. But according to what I believe, time is cyclical. Time goes in vast cycles. And during different parts of those cycles, conditions on our level of reality are different. Just like in the course of a year in the temperate countries, we go through seasons. There's winter, spring, summer, fall, then another winter. It's a cycle that repeats again and again and again. So many of the ancient wisdom traditions have this idea of cyclical time. The Mayan calendar has that. The ancient Greeks and Romans had a cyclical concept of time. The Vedic cosmology of India also has an idea of cyclical time. The cycles are called yugas, and there's a cycle of 4 yugas or 4 ages, and it repeats again and again and again. And the whole cycle, according to the traditional cosmology, lasts for 4,320,000,000 years. The first age is called Satya Yuga. It means the age of truth. And during that age, actually, people on our level of reality, on Earth, on the terrestrial level, are, in fact, more close to their origin in terms of their nature. However, with each progressive age, conditions on this level of reality grow more and more materialistic. In other words, the finer sentiments become degraded over time, and not just the sentiments and ideas, but the actual physical reality degrades with the passage of the different yugas. So the first yuga, the Satya Yuga, the age of truth and light and all of that, during that time, the conditions here on this level of reality would be approaching those on the higher levels. But as the cycles go on, things get progressively worse on this level until finally we reach the 4th age, which is called the Kali Yuga. And according to the Vedic cosmological calendar, we're now in the beginning of the Kali Yuga. And it's predicted to be a time of increasing social and environmental disturbance. And it's an age in which the finer sentiments of the human spirits become more and more degraded into hypocrisy, greed, anger, all of that. So things become a little more distant from the original source. We become more distant from the original source of our origins. So I would say, in response to your question, at certain times in the past, people on our level of reality were in fact more, quote, spiritual, because their nature, and the nature of this level of reality was closer to that of the higher original reality, which is our origin, from whence we've come. But in certain times, we're a little more distant from that, and at the present moment, we're in one of those times when we're quite distant from that original condition.
Well, it's certainly, that's what you've described about the Kali Yuga is certainly very much in line with what we can observe in reality today, that's for sure. Does the Vedic point of view, the Vedic teachings, have any kind of correlation with what we've been told about 2012? There's been so much hype and so much, crazy speculation about 2012. What's your point of view on that? What's your take on it?
Well, this whole idea of 2012 comes from the Mayan calendar from Central America, and the Mayan people definitely had a concept of vast cycles of time that repeat again and again and again. And according to the way many researchers read the Mayan calendar, in 2012 will be coming to the end of one of their cycles. And there are different interpretations of what's going to happen. Some people are predicting a huge cosmic catastrophe. Others are predicting, well, it's just a transition to a more enlightened age. So I'm not entirely sure what the correct interpretation of the Mayan calendar really is, according, especially what the Mayan people themselves understand is happening with it in terms of those cycles. A lot of our information comes not directly from Mayan sources, but from others who have interpreted it in particular ways. From the standpoint of the Vedic cosmology, I would say the predictions of the Kali Yuga don't include, at this point in time, any cosmic catastrophe that's going to wipe out life on Earth. Many people have perhaps seen the film that came out a year or two ago, 2012, which shows a huge cosmic catastrophe occurring.
Yes.
And I'm sure at some point in time something like that is going to happen. Even modern science would admit that eventually there are going to be cosmic catastrophes. But according to the Vedic cosmological calendar, those things are very, very far in the future, millions and millions of years into the future. And what the Vedic cosmological calendar does predict for the Kali Yuga is increasing social and environmental disturbances. And we see that happening around us. We don't see a big cosmic catastrophe happening, but we do see the kinds of social and environmental disturbances that are predicted in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. For example, they predict that as the Kali Yuga goes on, there will be extremes of heat and cold.
Mm.
And in recent times, some scientists have proposed we're in the midst of a global warming period. And many people are a little bit confused about it because it seems like we're experiencing the coldest winters ever
yes.
in recent memory. And so in terms of the Vedic predictions of what's going to happen in the Kali Yuga, it fits because the predictions of the Kali Yuga say there will be extremes of climate, extremes of heat, extremes of cold. They do say, the predictions also say that desertification will increase.
Mm.
That's happening. We see that happening. deforestation will increase. We see that happening. I'm talking now in terms of the environmental disturbances that are predicted. So we do see those sorts of things happening. We don't see a huge cosmic catastrophe happening. In terms of the social disturbances, the historical writings of ancient India predicted that in the Kali Yuga, governments will become very oppressive. They will burden the people with extreme taxation, and people will become very upset with that. They will become very unhappy with their governments, and we see this all over the world. I mean, people really are concerned about the high levels of taxation that are existing today. They are not looking at governments as their friends and well-wishers. We're seeing now in the Middle East a whole range of reactions against the governments there. Another prediction that was made, another social prediction that was made, is that people would get justice according to how much money they have.
Oh, wow.
And we do see that going on.
Absolutely.
So, thus far, I would say that what I see happening around me in the world today pretty much matches up with the predictions for the Kali Yuga that are contained in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. And I've just mentioned a few of them. There are many more such predictions.
Well, it sounds like something I could definitely stand to do a little bit more reading on, because that certainly is very accurate to describe how things are.
But another feature of the Vedic philosophy is that we are not prisoners of events. Say, just like when winter is approaching, we can't change the fact that winter is coming, that it's going to get cold. But, we can take actions to keep ourselves warm. Even though we can't change the climate, we can take action to keep ourselves and others warm. To use a metaphor, an example. So even though we are in a time of increasing environmental and social disturbance, we can understand that and take whatever action we can to try to keep ourselves and others in the best possible condition during these difficult times.
So we're not powerless, and we're not hopeless, and I think that's the most important message that people need to take away from any particular predictions about future events, is the idea that you're not locked into anything happening, and we have a certain measure of control by the idea that we can affect change ourselves, and together with other people, joining together and determining to lessen the impact of a lot of these things that are coming our way. So, and it kind of makes sense, the Yuga, the Yuga cosmology. I mean, it kind of makes sense in a very just looking at it from the outside perspective. If you start out in an age of truth, and as time goes by, you become further disconnected from that truth and from the spiritual origins from which you come. It only makes sense that when you come to the final one, the Kali Yuga, that things will have devolved to a point where there would be a tremendous amount of social upheaval because of the loss of the spiritual connection, and I think that in a way that kind of corresponds to ideas that I have, like with paranormal and extrasensory perception and things like this, that I think that people exhibit in various different ways, like you demonstrated with your remote viewing experiment. That in the ancient past, people had better abilities in this regard, simply because they were in touch with that, whatever it is that is outside of our physical bodies, and we're able to access knowledge and abilities that we still have latently, but that we have difficulty expressing within the framework of the society and material world that we live in today. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, actually I do. I think a lot of our current technology is an attempt to duplicate abilities that people once had naturally. For example, this remote viewing ability. Well, now we have handheld devices, with cameras in them, so that we can see each other remotely. And I think a lot of our technology today is an attempt to reproduce abilities that people once had naturally and freely. And of course, part of the reproduction today is the commercial aspect of it, to extract profit from people.
Obviously.
Through the technologies, to get them to pay for it. And in other words, these were things, abilities that people once had naturally, freely, without having to pay for them in any way. But now,
that's a really interesting.
The current age that we live in, there are people who are willing to try to give us some pseudo ability and make us pay for it.
That's a really...
And be controlled by it. So.
Yes, of course. And it's all part of the control factor that's involved, too. That's a really interesting way of putting it. Looking at technology as being like a pseudo-reproduction of something that we once had freely access to. I never really thought about it that way, but wow, that's a really great metaphor. There really is. Well, we only have probably about, we got 18 minutes left. Now, I did want to touch on the Aryan invasion idea and Indian archaeology. Now, it's your belief that, now correct me if I'm wrong here, it's your belief that the so-called cradle of civilization in the Middle East is not the cradle of civilization, that in fact we have civilization extending throughout the world, much older than archaeology and anthropology is willing to give credit to or recognize, based on the fact that we've found fossil human bones, anatomically modern human bones and tools and other things found at tremendous ages around the world that you've cataloged so well in your books, and that the actual civilization in India and in ancient India predate all of the so-called oldest civilizations that are recognized by mainstream science. Would that be fair to say?
Something like that. And I'll also just point out, if you look at the different cultural traditions, look at their version of their own history, it's quite different than the history that's being presented in today's textbooks. For example, if you look at Egyptian culture, today, archaeologists and historians will say, 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, civilization arose in Egypt. But if you look at the histories that the Egyptians themselves wrote, they have pharaoh lists that go back 70 or 80,000 years. There was an historian named Manetho who compiled these lists back in the later Egyptian times. And even when Herodotus, the Greek historian, went to Egypt during his time, during the time of the ancient Greeks, he noted in his book that the Egyptian priest told him his country, Greece, had a history going back tens of thousands of years. According to modern historical thought. Greek civilization goes back about 3,000 years, perhaps at most. But when Herodotus went to Egypt, the Egyptian priests were telling him they had in their temples historical records about Greek history going back tens of thousands of years. Even if you go to the Middle East, to the Babylonians and the Assyrians, Sumerians, according to historians today, their history goes back, similar age to the dates they give for Egyptian history, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years. But there was, Babylonian historian Berosus, who gave Babylonian king list going back 432,000 years. It's the same when we go to China. Historians today will say civilization began in China, 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. But if you go to the traditional Chinese sources, they say, well, they have emperor lists going back hundreds of thousands of years. So it's the same with India. According to the current histories, civilization, began in India about 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. They don't think it was anything to do with the Vedic culture, but they say the Vedic or Aryan people came into India from outside about 3,500 years ago. But if you look at the Vedic sources themselves, they don't have any such idea. There's no such idea. They just speak of Vedic culture being present in India for thousands and thousands, even millions of years. So no, I don't accept this idea that Vedic civilization began just 3,000 years ago when some tribes wandered in from Central Asia, and that isn't what the traditional Vedic sources themselves say. They speak of a developed civilization existing in that Indian subcontinent for millions of years, literally. Now, to some, that's going to seem like mythology, because first of all, according to the current evolutionary theories of human origins, there weren't any human beings anywhere in the world millions of years ago. So obviously that it simply has to be mythology. So one purpose for my forbidden archaeology work is to show that there is archaeological evidence that humans have been present on Earth for millions of years, and therefore these accounts of extreme human antiquity that we find in Vedic culture, in Egyptian culture, in the ancient Babylonian culture, in the Chinese culture, in the Mayan culture of Central America, this idea that humans have been present with developed civilizations on this planet going back far, far into the distant past may not just some mythological or fictional idea, may be the historical fact.
And sometimes it's better to go back to the original source whenever you get your information, rather than trying to tease out some other theory or whatever to fit into your preconceived notions about humanity. And the very fact that you've highlighted the fact that humans have been shown to be present on Earth for millions of years in your books, it certainly is extremely reasonable and to be expected that we would find evidence for civilizations rising and falling throughout all of those spans of years, and that would be everywhere around the world. And I think that embracing that particular idea and the possibility of it and the implications of it is something that a lot of people would do well to do whenever they consider, what their particular prejudices are or biases when it comes to, exploring the reality that's around us and being truthful with ourselves as a people and as humanity itself, and trying to come to terms with where we come from and what it all means.
Yeah, I agree with you with that. But I'll say one thing, however. I hold that if there are scientists or individuals who honestly think, that the currently dominant theories are the best ones, then I respect their right as individuals to accept those theories and maintain their belief in them. What I don't think they have a right to do is to impose their views on everyone. And that's where I draw the line. I respect academic freedom. I respect intellectual freedom. I respect the right of every individual to make up their own mind about these questions. But where I have a problem is when, well, first of all, I think they should be honest about the level of proof they have for whatever their particular idea is. But also, the main thing I would object to is I don't think that anyone has the right to impose their ideas on everyone else by convincing governments to give them monopolies in education systems. That's where I think the problem comes in. So I just want to make that point, that I respect the right of every individual to make up their own minds about these things. And I think you're also absolutely right that people who are interested in these questions should take seriously the whole range of evidence that's available that is relevant to these questions. It's one thing I often say to students of archaeology and anthropology. I've been invited to speak at many universities around the world, and I just tell them they should be aware of the whole data set that's relevant to their field of study and before making up their minds about these questions. And I think that's a pretty reasonable request.
Absolutely, and I did. And if I gave the impression that I was implying that
no, I don't think you were. I just
okay.
wanted to make an additional point to the one you were making. That I think it's that I find it's important, for me and in the experiences that I've had. Sometimes people think I'm threatening somehow their ability to come to their own conclusions about these things, which is definitely not the case. I've come to my conclusions. I'm trying to share them with whoever's willing to listen, but I'm not using government to impose them on everybody else through a monopoly in the education system.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And I think that you're just. I think you're doing a very valuable service, and with the work that you've done with Forbidden Archaeology and the Forbidden Archaeologists, your columns with Atlantis Rising magazine and Human Devolution, you're collecting a lot of disparate data for people to look at and to come up with their own conclusions. And like I said, I really admire you for being upfront with where your spiritual beliefs are and where you come from in looking at the evidence. And I think you have a really great mind, and I think that it's expressed in your writing and it's expressed in your work, and I think it's very wise for you to point out that fact that everybody has the right to hold whatever position that they feel is the one that's important to them, and that at the same time, it probably would be valuable for people to take the time to look at some points of view and some data and material that's outside of the so-called mainstream in order to come up with a more well-rounded and more well-received final answer or a conclusion that they want to draw as a result of that. And I think that you've done a great service with your work to try and get this information out to a lot of people who wouldn't normally have access to it, outside of the academic community, and being more widely disseminated amongst people so that they have access to information that's not given to them, as you rightly observed in the beginning of our talk, things that are not in the textbooks that we're taught in school and things that are not talked about by people who are in influential positions and things of this nature. So I really do want to commend you, and I want to thank you again for coming on the show. We have a couple minutes left, Michael. Is there anything that you're doing right now? Are you going on any lecture tours, or are you working on any new works? Anything you want to plug?
Okay, next Wednesday I start on a 3-week lecture tour of universities, principally in the Midwestern part of the United States of America. I'll be starting out at Pennsylvania State University, Wayne State University in Detroit, a lot of universities in the Chicago area, Detroit area, University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, Washington University in St. Louis. So for information about those upcoming lectures, which will be coming in the course of the next 3 or 4 weeks, listeners could go to my website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com, look at the schedule section, the schedule link, and as the details about the individual lectures become available, they'll be posted there for any of the listeners who might be interested in attending. Okay,
that's excellent. So anybody who wants to hear Michael Cremo at any of the lectures that he's going to be attending, you can go to mcremo.com. And right there on the main page, whenever you get there to the left, there's a little menu, and it's a few down. You can see schedule. Just click on that, and when the schedule is updated, there will be it'll be listed there, and you'll be able to see where you can listen to him speak. And also, he has a couple other websites you might want to check out: humandevolution.com and forbiddenarchaeologist.com. And his books, Human Devolution, The Forbidden Archaeologist, and with co-author Richard Thompson, the original masterwork, The Hidden History of the Human Race, Forbidden Archaeology, which has just a massive amount of information in there for anybody who's interested in looking at the hidden history of the human race and the evidence for extreme human antiquity. And I take this last minute just to say thank you, Michael, again for joining me on the show. I really appreciate you spending the time with us. And I had a fantastic discussion with you, and I appreciate you ranging over all the different topics that we went into. And I just want to tell you, keep up the great work, and I'll be following your work in the future. So thank you again.
Well, thank you. It's been a really great conversation.
Yes, I had a wonderful time, Michael. So maybe in the future, after you're done with your lecture tour, maybe we can get you back on and get caught up on some of the new archaeological finds that you've come across and any new insights that you have.
That would be great.
All right, Michael. Thanks again. I really appreciate you being on the show, and I will talk to you again soon. Okay?
Okay. Thanks a lot, Ted.
Okay. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that was Michael Cremo. Again, join me next week at same time, same place, 7 to 9 p.m. here on blogtalkradio.com/The Stench of Truth. You can also check me out at YouTube My username is Tenebrous, Tenebrous. I also have a show there called The Stench of Truth, where I talk about politics and economics, and it's not for the faint of heart. Most of my videos contain some profanity. Some of them contain quite a lot. This is a different venue, and I do a different thing here. So if you're interested, check me out on YouTube. I also have a blog. My blog is at tenebrous-thestenchoftruth.blogspot.com. I'll try to keep that up to date as much as I can. So thank you all. Join me next week. Bye-bye.